of jiving. And the main reason is that it has some inherent risks. But before we talk about the inherent risks and how to jive, I want to point out to you the most important of my lovely artwork that's up here on the board. And if you guys can't see it in the back, it's this picture right here. I'll make it bigger for you. The important thing to notice about this skipper's face is that he or she is smiling. Because it's all about having fun, right? The reason we go out there sailing is to have fun. You're not going to burn a lot of calories, you're not going to lose a lot of weight, it's all about having fun. And I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about jiving and capsizing and things like that, because it's all part of the fun. So remember to smile, and remember that not to be afraid of jiving, because it's all having a good time. So now let's talk about jiving. So how do you jive? It's very similar to coming about, in that coming about was an exaggeration of heading up, jiving is simply an exaggeration of bearing off. But it has to be done a little more carefully. Like I mentioned, there's no wrong way to come about. There is wrong ways of jiving. So jiving has to be learned to be done in a more particular way. And the inherent risks of jiving are getting hit in the head with the boom. But if you get hit in the head with the boom during a jive, it's much more like getting hit in the head with a baseball bat. Because the wind is taking, it's not the momentum of the boat, but it's the full force of the wind that's moving the boom across, if it's a very windy day. And the other risk is capsizing, and I'll explain how you might capsize. So jiving, it looks like with me just standing here in a room, you let your crew know that you're jiving, and the command for that is jibe ho, or I'm jiving. And again, I've got the tiller in one hand, the main sheet in the other hand, but in this case I'm on a run, so the boom's way out there, not really close in. And the first thing to do, of course, is bear off, pulling the tiller toward me, as opposed to heading up. But the biggest difference is, you don't want to begin the maneuver while you're sitting in your seat. It was perfectly okay to begin the maneuver of coming about while sitting in my seat. But you don't want to do that when you're driving. You want to actually get up out of your seat, stand and crouch in the middle of the boat. The reason for that is, you never want to end up on the same side of the boat you began on once the boom comes across. If that happens, there's too much weight on this side of the boat and you can capsize. So to make absolutely positive that you're not going to be on this side of the boat when the boom comes across, you start by standing in the middle of the boat. So I've got my main sheet in one hand, my tiller in the other hand. I get up, I stand in the middle of my boat, I crouch down a little bit so I'm prepared to duck, and I start bearing off, pulling the tiller away from the sail. And then I have to switch hands with the main sheet and the tiller. But in this case, I do not want to let go of the tiller or the main sheet. So I am going to do it behind my back, which is also an option when you're coming about, but I'm definitely going to do it behind my back when I'm jiving. So, main sheet in one hand, tiller in the other hand. I get up out of my seat, I move over, I crouch down, I start bearing off. As soon as I start bearing off, I'm going to reach behind my back, and I'm going to switch hands with the tiller and the main sheet. Okay, so now the tiller's in this hand, the main sheet's in this hand. I'm going to move over to this side of the boat, I'm going to continue to bear off. The boom is going to come flying overhead with much greater velocity and distance, and by the time it does that, I'm already sitting on this side of the boat, and I've straightened the tiller. Okay? So again, it's very similar, but a few nuances that make it different. The important thing, well, one of the important things, is that when you're done with the jive, you've straightened the tiller. I mentioned that when you're coming about, it's okay to straighten the tiller later rather than sooner, because you want to make sure you're not stuck in irons. It's the opposite when jiving. As soon as the jive is done, as soon as the boom comes flying over, even before maybe it reaches its final destination, you want to straighten the tiller. Okay, so when the jive is done, you straighten the tiller. If you don't straighten the tiller, then you're no longer bearing off, are you? You're actually heading up, because now the sail's on the other side of the boat. And what can happen is your boat can now start heading up into the wind, what's called rounding up, and start spinning around in circles and you capsize. So what this looks like on the board, and again I'll show it to you on the dock. So this boat is on a run. Its sail is, so it's bearing off from this side over here by pulling the tiller away from the sail. It eventually makes it to a run. So the sail's all the way out. The wind is directly behind the boat. The telltales are streaming directly ahead, and it's time to jive. So the skipper lets the crew know that he or she is jiving, stands up, gets in the middle of the boat, crouches down, and starts bearing off by pulling the tiller away from the sail. As the skipper does this, he or she switches hands with the mainsail and the tiller, ducks down, moves over to the other side of the boat. Meanwhile, the boat starts heading in this direction. The sail comes flying overhead, and by the time it reaches its destination, you've straightened the tiller, and you're off in that direction. Okay? So jiving is going from a run to a reach, going from one tack to the other, and you're going downwind. Coming about is doing the same thing, but going upwind. Why don't I take you out to the boat on the dock, and I'll just show you what these look like on an actual boat, and then we'll come back in and we'll finish up.